So far in this section, we have learned how to create, fetch, and delete records in a database by sending an HTTP request to the server. Now, we also want to learn how to update an existing record in the database. But before we do that, let's first go ahead and let's set up our Angular application in order to allow users to update a record. So if we go to our Angular application, in this Angular application, we are displaying all the tasks from the tasks collection of our database. So here we have our database. In there we have this task collection, and there currently we have two tasks. So we are displaying those tasks here in our Angular application. And if we want to create a new task, we can click on this create task button. It will open up a form. We can fill this form, and when we click on this create task button, it will create a new task in the database. Now if you notice, each task which is being displayed here, it also has this edit button. And what we want is when this edit button is clicked, we want to open up a form. So we want to open up a form something like this. And there the button should say update task. And all these fields should be populated with the details of that task. And then those details can be edited. And when the update task button is clicked, it should update that task in the database. Let's see how we can achieve that. So the first thing which we want to do is whenever this edit button is clicked, we want to open up this same form. For that, let's go to VS Code. Let's go to dashboard component.html. And there, if I scroll down, here we have that edit button. On this edit button, let's bind click event. And to this click event, let's assign a method. Let's call it on edit task clicked. Okay, let's copy this method name and let's go ahead and let's create it in our dashboard component class. So if I scroll to the bottom, let's create it here. Now, in order to edit a task, we need the task ID. So based on the task ID itself, we are going to edit the task. So to this on edit task clicked method, we are also going to specify a parameter. Let's call it ID, and its type is going to be string, or it can also be undefined. And in here, we are going to write the logic to open up the edit form. Now, how are we going to do that? In order to open up the edit form, if I scroll up, we have a property called show create task form. So if its value is false, in that case, this form will not be displayed. If its value is true, then only that form will be displayed. So all we have to do is we have to set this show create task form to true when the edit button is clicked. So in here, let's say this dot show create task form equals true. Okay, and it will open up the form. So now whenever the edit button will be clicked, it will open that form. Also, since we have specified this ID parameter here for this on edit task clicked method, when we are calling this method from our component class here, there also we need to pass the value for that ID parameter. Now from where we are going to get the value for that ID parameter? Well, here if you notice, on this div, we are using this ng for directive, and using that ng for directive, we are looping over all tasks from this all tasks array, and for each iteration, we are going to get the task object inside this task variable. So this task variable, it is going to have the ID property. So here you can say task.id. Okay, so for whichever task we will click the edit button, its ID will be read and it will be passed to this on edit task clicked method. All right, let's save the changes now. Let's go to the web page. Okay, and now when I click on this edit button, you see now it is opening up that form. Also, when I click on this create task button, in that case also it is opening up the form. Now, when we are clicking on this edit button, there instead of saying create task, here we want to show update task. So the button value should be update task. Let's do that. So let's again go back to VS Code. And that form we have inside this create task component. So here if I go to this create task component.html, there you will see that we have a form, the same form which we are displaying in the UI. And if I scroll down here, the value of this button is create task. Now what we want is we want to set this value dynamically. So when we are going to create a new task, at that time the value of this button should be create task. But when we are editing a task, at that time its value should be update task. Let's see how we can achieve that. So for that, let's go to the component class of this create task, and in here, let's create a property. Let's call this property is edit mode. It is going to be a boolean value, and initially let's set it to false. Okay, now when the create task button will be clicked in the UI, that time we want to set this is edit mode to false, because there we are creating a new task, we are not editing it. So that time the is edit mode should be false. But when we are going to click on this edit button, so when we are going to click on this edit button, at that time we want to set this is edit mode to true. Okay, now these tasks we are displaying it in the dashboard component, and this form here, it is in create task component. So in the create task component, we have created a property called isEditMode, and for this property, we are going to pass the value from the dashboard component. So here, to do that, what we are going to do is we are going to decorate it with at input decorator. Okay, and in order to use this at input decorator, we also need to import it from Angular/Go. And now this is edit mode property. It is an input property, so we can bind it in our parent component. So let me copy this property name, and the parent component here is the dashboard component.html. If I scroll up here, we are using the selector of create task component. So there we are also going to bind this is edit mode property, and for the property binding we use a set of square brackets. In there we specify the property name, and here we want to assign some value to this is edit mode property. Now what we are going to do is, in the dashboard component class, we are going to create a property. So let me create that property here. Let's call it maybe edit mode. It is going to be a boolean value, and initially let's set it to false. Now when create task button is clicked, in that case we want to set this edit mode to false. So inside this open create task form, inside this method, we are going to set this edit mode to false. Okay, but when the edit button is clicked, there we are going to set this edit mode to true. Okay, and now we are going to pass this edit mode. We are going to assign this edit mode property to this is edit mode property of create task component. Let's save the changes. So just keep in mind that this edit mode property will be true when this edit button is clicked, and this edit mode property will be false when this create task button is clicked. Okay, and then we are passing that value to this is edit mode property of create task component. Now we are going to use this property in the HTML of create task component, and there, instead of setting a hard-coded value create task, now we are going to use string interpolation syntax, and there let's say if this is edit mode, if it is true, in that case the value should be update task. Otherwise, if it is false, the value should be create task. Okay, then if I scroll up, we also have a heading here. So in here we have this heading, create a new task. So here also I'm going to use string interpolation syntax. Again, if this is edit mode is true, that means we are editing a task. So that time we want to set the header to update task. Otherwise, if this is edit mode is false, in that case, we know that we are creating a new task. So here in that case, we will say create a new task. With this, let's save the changes. Let's go to the web page. And now when I click on this create task button, it says create a new task and the button is create task. But if I click on this edit button, there it says update task and the button value is also update task. All right. Next, what we want is, let's say I click on the edit button of second task. So it is going to open this form. Now in this form, we want to populate these fields with the details of that task. So in here, we want to display the title of the task, which we want to edit. Here we want to display the description of the task, which we want to edit. We want to display to whom that task is assigned to, when it was created, what is the priority, and what is the status. So let's see how we can do that. For that, again, in the create task component, we are going to create another input property. Okay, and I'm going to call this property selected task, and it is going to be of type task. So in order to use this task class, we also need to import it. Okay, now what we want is when this form which we have here, when it is fully initialized, when the view of this form is completely rendered in the web page, we want to set the fields of this form. Now, when this view, that means this form is fully initialized, when it is fully rendered in the web page in the browser, after that, ng after view init lifecycle hook will be called. So here I'm going to implement ng after view init lifecycle hook. Okay, and inside this ng after view init lifecycle hook, I'm going to set the value for the fields of this form. So for that, first we need to get access to this form in our component class. So here I'm going to create another property. I'll simply call it as task form. It is going to be of type ng form. Okay, and let's decorate it with @viewChild decorator. And in order to use this @viewChild decorator, we also need to import it from angular/go. And to this, we need to pass a selector based on which we want to select an element. So on this form, we are using a template reference variable. We are calling it task form. So let me copy this template reference variable and let's pass it to this view child decorator. Now, what are we assigning to this task form template reference variable? If you see here to this task form template reference variable, we are assigning this ng form directive. That means this task form, it is going to store an instance of ng form object, and that instance will be assigned to this task form property of this create task component. Okay, so using this instance of this ng form, we can set the fields of that form. So if I scroll down here, I can simply say this dot task form dot here. Let's try to use set value. So we have learned about set value, and we have learned that using this set value, we can set the value for the fields of a form. And to this, we are going to pass this selected task. So here, let's say this dot selected task. Now, what we want is, if I go to the web page and if I click on this create task button, you see it is showing an empty form. So in case of a create task, we want to show an empty form. But when I click on the edit button of one of these tasks, at that time, I don't want to show an empty form. So for that, to this selected task, we are going to assign that task object for which the edit button is clicked. Now the edit button is clicked in the dashboard component, right? So let's go to dashboard component.ts, and there, when the edit button will be clicked, its ID will be assigned to this ID parameter of this on edit task clicked method. And using this ID parameter, we are going to select that task object. And to do that, inside this all tasks property, we are storing all the tasks. So from this all tasks array, we are going to find that task whose ID matches this ID value. So for that, what we are going to do is we'll say this dot all tasks. So this all tasks, we have a property which is storing all the tasks which we have created. On that, we are going to call the find method. And using this find method, we are going to loop over this all tasks array. And to this find method, we will pass a callback function. Okay. And when this find method will loop over this all tasks array, for each iteration, it is going to pass that element to this callback function. So let's simply call it as task. So for the first iteration, this find method, it will assign this task parameter with the first task element in this all task array. For the second iteration, this find method will assign this task parameter with the second task object in this all tasks array, and so on. So here we can write a condition. We can say task.id equals this id parameter. Okay, and here we will also use this return statement. So this find method, it is going to find a task object based on this condition. It is going to find that task object whose ID matches the ID parameter value. And it is also going to return us that task. So in this dashboard component, again, we are going to create a property. Let's call this property maybe selected task. Again, it is going to be of type task. And now when the edit button is clicked, we want to set that selected task with that task object. So here we can say this dot selected task equals that task object. And we are going to assign this selected task property to the selected task property of this create task component. So in the dashboard component, let's also go ahead and let's bind that selected task property of create task component. Let me actually copy the name of this property here, which we want to bind. And to this, we want to assign the selected task property of dashboard component. So we want to assign this property. Okay, so in this way, from the dashboard component, we are passing the selected task to this create task component. All right, let's save the changes here. And also, when we are clicking on the create task button, that time we need to pass an object where each field should be empty. So in the dashboard component here, when we are creating a task, so here what we are going to do is we are going to set this dot selected task to an object, and in that object we need to set the title to empty string. So the title should be empty. We also need to set description to empty string. Then we also need to set assigned to empty string. All right, it should not be dot, it should be a comma. Okay, then we have created at, this should also be empty string. We have priority, again this should also be empty string, and we have status, and this should also be empty string. Okay, so when the create task button is clicked, all these fields should be empty. But when the edit task button is clicked, that time it should not be empty. It should be populated with that task detail value. Okay, let's save the changes and let's go to create task component.ts. So now using this set value, when we are clicking on this create task button, that time the selected task will be an object with all the fields as empty string. So in that case, it should show an empty form. But when we are clicking on the edit task button, at that time, the properties of this selected task will have some value. So the form field should be populated with those values. With this, if I save the changes and if you go to the web page, let me also open developer console here just to check if we have any errors. Okay, let me clear everything. If I click on this create task button, you see we have an error and it says there are no form controls registered with this group. If you are using ng model, you may want to check next tick. For example, you can use set timeout. So to resolve this error, what we can do is here I can use set timeout function. Okay, and inside this set timeout function, let's pass a callback function. And inside that callback function, let's write this logic. So let's cut it from here and let's paste here. And for the time interval, we can simply pass 0 seconds. Okay, let's save the changes now. Let's go to the web page. Let me clear everything again and let me click on this create task button. So in this case, it is empty. And let's click on this edit button. You see, the form is populated with the details of that task. But here we also have an error. And it says cannot find form control with name ID. We have this error because if you remember, when we use this set value method, to this we need to pass an object, and the structure of that object must match the structure of the value property of template driven form. But in the template driven form, so basically this task form, it is going to store a template driven form. There the value object will not have an ID property. Let me actually show you that. So here what I will also do is I will log this dot task form dot value. Okay, let's save the changes. Let's go back to the web page. Let me clear everything, and again let me click on this edit button. So you see here we are logging the value object. In this value object we do not have an ID property, but what is the type of this selected task? It is of type task, and in this task class we also have the ID property. Even though it is optional, but we do have the ID property. So this structure here, it is not matching the structure of the value property of the template driven form, and that's why we have this error. Now to solve this error, instead of using this set value method, we can simply use patch value method. So here we can say dot form dot patch value. Okay, so we have learned that when we use patch value, we do not need to pass the exact structure. We only need to specify the structure for those properties which we actually want to edit. So if I save the changes now, if we go to the web page and when I click on the edit button, you see we don't have any error, and we can see that the form is populated with the details of that task. Let me close this developer console here. So you can see the form is populated with the details of that task. If I click edit button of the second task, there also the form is populated with the details of that task. Okay, from here, let me remove this console.log statement. We don't need it. And this is all we need for now. So when this edit button is clicked, the button says update task. The form is populated with the task details, and the form header is also update task. Now what we want is, let's say the user has edited the details. Let's say he is now calling this task as demo task 7, and he has also added some more description. Okay, and now when he clicks on this update task button, these updated details now should be saved in the database. So instead of creating a new record here, this task, so here we have that task. So actually we are trying to edit the second task. So here the title should change to demo task 7, and the description should also change. Okay, so instead of creating a new task, we should be able to update this existing task. Let's see how we can do that in our next lecture. This is all from this lecture. If you have any questions, then feel free to ask it. Thank you for listening and have a great day.